It started out like any other day during the pandemic. I walked into work with a mask on, some gloves, clocked in, and walked over to my register. There was only one customer near it who just stood there staring at me. No movement, no signal to let me know she was ready. And I clearly had no line. I wasn't occupied by anyone or anything. I was just standing at the register. I figured maybe she was waiting for me to say something. So eventually I asked her, "Ma'am, is there anything I can help you with?" to let her know I was free. She just rolled her eyes and proceeded to move towards my register. It was at this moment I had to wonder, how is it you socialize in an antisocial world? It started out with some very general research on how different generations socialize and how this could affect my findings. I noticed it was harder to obtain scholarly articles with research about Generation Z, but this one article helped me to draw comparisons between millennials and baby boomers. Bridging the Gap: How the Generations Communicate was the title of the article. This research guide helps us to better understand the methods these two generations use for communication and their reasoning behind it. Here's an excerpt from the article. Quote, "According to Daily, 2014, millennials like to communicate over text or internet because it allows them to have more control over their interactions than if the interaction was over the phone or face-to-face. According to Hazarat, 2009, the millennial generation feels that baby boomers over-explain and overuse face-to-face meetings, which they believe can take vital time away from other parts of their day. Baby boomers, on the other hand, believe millennials overuse email and texting when it could be more effective to communicate over the phone or meet in person. Overall, all generations believe in the importance and benefits of face-to-face communication, but they have trouble in finding balance between the two." Hazarat, 2009. End quote. This information is a bit dated. However, I can agree, being someone from Generation Z, there needs to be a balance between the two, and I'm not sure any generation has found it yet. It's incredibly silly how obsessed we are with our devices. Granted, everything is on them. If you think about it, we have our school, sometimes work, depending on if you're in a position that allows you to work from home, remote, our social lives, our TV, video games, music, or just in general entertainment. And you can order food to your very doorstep with a couple pushes of a button. I'm not saying living your life through your phone is the way to live, but I can sympathize with generations that are learning it as being their main way to live. I had to speak with an expert at this point and better understand the positives as well as the negatives to this way of operating in the day-to-day. So I emailed Dr. Mary Pritchard, well-respected social psychologist at Boise State University. She agreed to meet with me, and I felt it was only fitting that we met over Zoom, one of the main online video chatting services used worldwide, within companies, schools, you name it. We discussed COVID-19 and its part in shaping our antisocial world of today. Here is most of the interview.
So basically, my research question is, how do people, I guess, socialize in a non-social world? And this has to do with COVID and, how we have our main communication through technology, even prior to COVID. And I just wanted to ask some questions that I guess could help me determine or understand why we're non-social a little bit too. So my first question is, what ways do most people communicate or interact in our current society that has been noticed or studied by psychologists such as yourself?
Are you talking about since COVID, or are you talking about in general?
In general.
I think a lot of it depends on your job,
Mm-hmm.
And kind of what you do in the world. Pre-COVID, I think a lot of interactions, and also generation. I think a lot of interactions, for adults in a work setting were face-to-face. They were via email, phone, with friends and family. It might be text. Social media has become an increasing way that we communicate with each other. And I think definitely more so since in the past couple of years since COVID, everybody's online and everybody's communicating via, Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook, in addition to email and phone and texting. I think probably text and some sort of messaging are the ways that people predominantly communicate these days. Some of that I think is generational and it was already happening pre-COVID. And I think that COVID has really cemented the fact that we are now not a face-to-face society.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Do you think that this makes any particular generation stronger in communication? Or do you think that's a very broad, vague question?
It's a broad-based question. And so even before COVID, there was a lot of concern among researchers in psychology that all of our online communication actually is less effective. And we know this, that it's less effective than in-person communication. And so we're starting to see kind of a generation that struggles more with face-to-face communication because everything is just quick, texting, right? And so now we've got people in business meetings that will say out loud, LOL, right? And it's like, no. that's a short form. Like, right. We don't speak like that in real life. I think the other issue is that social media in particular, I'm going to speak to that because that's what I know more about. The detriments of social media really is that communication is not authentic. Mm-hmm. Because the way that we present ourselves online is not the real us.
Right. Yes.
And so there's a lot of concern
about... It's a very designed version of us.
It's the highlight reel.
Yes.
Right? It's the photoshopped, I'm having fun with my friends or I'm on vacation. This is my great life. Mm-hmm. That's not at all the day-to-day life. It's not at all reality. And so the component that's missing from online communication is that kind of authenticity. It's the reality based because it's so easy. I mean, sometimes, you'll go online and there are other people that tell you everything that's happening in their day, but They are really few and far between. It's usually the highlight reel, which gives everyone else a very unrealistic perception of what's going on in your life.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. For sure. No, I definitely agree with that. I think it's really interesting how that affects people watching too. How that kind of brings in this insecurity of why am I not out doing these things?
Yeah. FOMO.
What to say about me,
Yeah. FOMO was not a thing 20 years ago.
Yes, it isn't. And I think it's kind of scary how that maybe is going to affect this incoming set of generations.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's very digitally based communication, but you're missing so much.
Right.
So let's go back to your question, because I think I did go off course. So one of the things you were talking about was the positives of online communication.
I think what makes this generation stronger in their communication because of technology, and what makes this generation lack in communication specifically.
I think we covered the lack.
Yeah.
I think the stronger really, I think COVID really illustrated that.
Okay. Yeah.
So when we talk about some of the students in my lab, we're looking at social support during COVID.
Of course.
And actually found out that the younger generations were doing better because they're so used to communicating online that it was it wasn't a seamless transition, but it was an easier transition to get their needs for belonging, their needs for support met, because you already know how to message, and that's part of the day-to-day life. And so when we looked at who was really suffering, so looking at suicide rates, for example, so a study just came out on suicide rates during this whole COVID, and people really thought it was going to be up. Like, people were really concerned. Depression was up, anxiety was up, but suicide would be up. But that's not what happened. So in younger generations, that's not at all what happened, right? It actually got better. And we think it's because communication was still happening. Like, people were struggling and they were reaching out online because they're used to reaching out online. They're used to instant messaging or Snapchat or whatever. Older generations were the ones that struggled because that wasn't their MO. They didn't know that they could just go message somebody because that wasn't part of their day-to-day life, right? I mean, you email, you talk to face-to-face. We couldn't do that, right? Because we had the lockdowns for so long. And so the people who really suffered, and not that younger generations didn't suffer with anxiety and depression, they absolutely did, but the ones who tipped the weight to being suicidal tended to be the older generations. And it was really that missing piece of communication and support, because they didn't know that they had all these avenues available to them that younger generations use every day anyway, even when we don't have COVID, right?
Right.
And so I think one of the strengths is that you have a variety of ways that you can reach out for support and communicate with one another. And that's natural and it's second nature. And it wasn't as much of a big deal to try to figure out, how am I going to make this work? Right. I'm not saying it was easy for anybody. I'm just saying we didn't see the negatives in terms of suicide rates that we thought we would in the younger generations based on the anxiety and depression that we were seeing. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I think that's really interesting to point out. Do you think that the way we communicate right now as a society is due to, do you think the differences in the way of communication is it simply one answer, or do you think it has to do with both the age group, the generation, the societal differences right now with COVID?
Yeah. COVID has changed our world. Mm-hmm. I think generational differences were already there pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. And I think COVID has really cemented, like, everybody communicates online now because it's what we're used to, mm-hmm. right? And that's been good. And that's also been very bad. I mean, you can just look at what's going on in the world and what's happened in the world, over the past couple of years we've had, on the one hand, people, peaceful protest, but we've also had riots and we've had destruction and we've had some hate crimes are on the rise. And a lot of that is the misinformation that's so easy to spread with the click of a button.
Right.
Right. It's so easy for things to go viral that are not fact checked, that are not true, that are malicious. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we look at humanity right now, and it's not pretty, right? We look around the world and
very polarized,
very politicized, and we've politicized a virus. It's a freaking virus. It doesn't pick sides, right? Like,
it's not liberal or conservative.
No, it's a virus. It's going to mutate. There's nothing any political side can do that's going to stop that from happening. And yet, there's a phenomenon called social contagion. Mm-hmm. And it existed pre-social media, but it's really just caught on in the past couple of years. And I think, COVID started it, but it's like, now we can't stop. It's like we're addicted to the next headline, the next story, the next gossip. But a lot of it's just inaccurate. It's misinformation. And because it can spread virally in seconds, it's really going to have done our mental health, our physical health harm, because there's nobody regulating what's out there. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think the differences were there. COVID just really made us take a look at at how bad things, right? I mean, I'm thinking about Facebook and Instagram, like the big lawsuit that just happened with Facebook having to put some filters and changing some things on Instagram because they knew it targeted kids and they knew it made them addicted and they knew it had all these negative consequences and they did it anyway, right? And so we were learning. And I think had it not been for COVID and the fact that we've been so reliant on social media, some of these things wouldn't have been exposed and they needed to be exposed. But it also is glaring in your face the potential harms of using social media as your primary communication device, right? Because it isn't fact checked, right? I mean, at least when you're watching the evening news, you hope that some of what you're hearing has at least been fact checked. And you don't have anybody calling themselves an expert and just spreading information that could be malicious or harmful in other ways.
Oh yeah, for sure. Do you think after everything that's gone on within the past few years, we are going to return to some normalcy with physical interaction? Or do you think we are affected indefinitely in some way and it's not going to be the same?
I don't think it's going to be the same. I say that because we have giant corporations that have closed up shop with their office buildings and sent everybody remote because they figured out we could do the work from home, do it better, and it's a lot cheaper when you don't have all this overhead of paying for an office building. Right. I think some things are going to be permanently altered. I think some things will be altered in the short term, but nobody knows what the short term is right now.
Okay.
Right? Because we're still in the middle of COVID. It hasn't gone anywhere. Right? People are still getting sick. We still have all these restrictions. We still have countries that are in lockdown. We still have restrictions traveling. We still have the warnings out there, be careful when you're traveling over the holidays. We're expected to see an uptick. And all of those factors are going to keep people, I think, are going to affect their decision-making as long as we're still scared of COVID.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And how much longer that's going to go on. Yeah, who thought we'd be here, 2 years later?
I definitely didn't.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think to the extent that businesses have closed up shop and gone entirely remote, that's not going to change. Why would you go back, right?
Do you think school's going to be forever changed as well, to some degree?
I think to some degree, yeah. I mean, again, it's hard to forecast a year from now what it's going to look like.
Right.
A year ago, we couldn't forecast that we'd still be masked and we'd still be, right, having these policies on campus. K through 12 schools still fighting over masking and social distancing and all of that. So it's really hard to predict a year from now, even. What is this going to be? Are we still going to be masked, right? Are we still going to be in this? I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I think I noticed a significant shift in the utilization of technology as I was coming up in school. Mm-hmm. And I think because of COVID, that possibly could have ignited this movement towards just making school online.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it may just continue in that direction.
Yeah. I think some students learned over the past year and a half that they thrive in an online environment and they want to stay online.
Right.
And they're mad when they have to come to campus because they want to be at home. Mm-hmm. Students moved home, right? But why would I pay to live in the dorm or an apartment in Boise when I could take my online classes from my bedroom in LA or whatever, right?
Right.
But we also have students that realize that while they could do online learning, they are terrible at online, right? That they don't want to do that if given the option. I will say, even pre-COVID, the online sections of our classes always filled first. Mm-hmm. And pre-COVID, it was because we had students that didn't live in Boise and they were taking advantage of the online classes because they could do their degree anywhere. I think the numbers of students that applies to has skyrocketed since COVID because so many people have moved.
Right.
And so to that extent, I mean, that just being able, like you said, right, kind of this permanent shift of why would I pay for housing and move and, have all these extra expenses to go to college when I could just stay where I am and take classes from any university, right? Because you have a lot more options.
Right.
You're not landlocked anymore, right?
Right. I also have another question now thinking about it. Do you think not them being at home in bed doing their classes has shifted how they socially interact, but maybe the fact that they haven't been able to go off and be in a different environment and meet different people, how that's maybe affected them socially?
Yeah, socializing online is very different than in-person interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, just talking to students and colleagues, that this year, most people were remote last year, and coming back to campus, the students and faculty that chose to teach to be online or to be hybrid or in person, like, it's weird. It's really weird to be back person to person. It's like I almost forgot how to do this.
Right.
But it was 1 year, right? And yet, like, we suddenly have forgotten how to interact in person, and we just are on Zoom now.
Yeah.
And so will 1 year permanently set us back? No. But is that 1 year potentially going to have carry forward effects, and people be looking for online work and online school and opportunities that may not have been available pre-COVID? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a couple of colleagues who were like, you know what? I don't want to come back to campus. I want to just keep teaching online. Why do I have to come in? And I'm like, yeah, we proved last year that you really don't. And there are always going to be students that want online sections for whatever reason. And so I think that kind of goes back to our earlier kind of permanent altering of the workforce. To some extent, that's happened, and I think it will continue. I mean, there's some things you can't, like, you're going to have checkers at grocery stores, right? You're going to have gas station attendants. You can't not have people in some of these occupations. But I think part of the labor shortage we have right now, it's not a lack of availability of people. It's a lack of availability of people that want to do that job in person.
Yeah.
Right? It's safer and easier to be at home. And I don't know how long that's going to last. I don't know how much of it's COVID fears and how much of it is, hey, I can get paid from working from home. Why would I not? Right?
For sure. Yeah. I definitely see that. I'm curious to know, and this is, again, a big, broad question, and I feel like you maybe answered this a little bit before, but we didn't fully touch on it.
Okay.
Why is in-person, face-to-face interaction so important, and why does my generation need it?
So there's a couple of different answers behind that. First, we know that face-to-face is more effective, right? It's so much easier to misunderstand someone when you don't have the nonverbal cues. Zoom has helped, right? Because we can see each other. Although it's still not a complete picture because we're looking at our cameras. We're not actually looking at each other, right? Yeah. And so we're still missing out on all of the
always
things.
Touching my hair in the camera, looking to make sure I don't have anything on my face.
Right.
Other than the person.
Right. And it's not quite the same as if we met in a coffee shop and we're face to face. So we know that. And the other thing is that we're learning from the research that getting those needs met, those fundamental human needs to belong, to fit in, to self-esteem, kind of requires face-to-face interaction. Online doesn't cut it. And we think there's actually some biological reasons for that. So one of the hormones that makes us loving and nurturing is called oxytocin. It's a bonding hormone. That's released through touch. You don't get that online.
No.
You never will get that online.
No.
Right? You need the hug. You need the physical contact with your best friends or your mom or whoever, but you just cannot replace that online. Mm-hmm. The other thing, and the verdict is still out on this one. And so in our brain, we have what are called mirror neurons. And it lets us, when we're growing up, it lets us learn faster by mimicking other people. So in person, if I see you do something, I can learn to do it. What we don't know yet, because it just hasn't been that much time, is do those same neurons get triggered in a Zoom environment?
Right.
Or do
Okay.
you have to physically be close to somebody and see them live in person for those neurons to get triggered? We don't know. And so again, like going back to that schooling, K through 12, a lot of students struggle. I think college less so, but the K through 12, a lot of the young kids especially really struggled with trying to school in an online environment. And part of it was lack of attention and focus, because they're not used to sitting here, right? They're used to running around and playing, and that's really hard to sit there and focus. But one theoretical possibility also is that they're not learning as well because their neurons are not being activated like they would normally be in a face-to-face environment.
Interesting. Okay.
So some
Right.
of the things I don't think we're ever going to be able to get from Zoom.
Zoom interaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not biologically wired to do that.